This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's January 2nd, 2025. On this day in 1869, all hell broke loose in Shelbyville in a racial firefight that did not go the way the instigators expected. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. We'll have the news of the day in just a few minutes, but to start things off, let's dive into that 19th century gun battle. The point of contention was a school, specifically a school for black folks. This was 1869, before schooling for poor people of any racial group was widely available or valued. And more importantly, it was just a few years after the end of the Civil War and the end of slavery in this country. Tennessee didn't really go through the same Reconstruction process as other southern states, but it was still a weird, somewhat lawless time. The state hadn't yet adopted a new constitution, which all of the former Confederate states had to do. People who'd been personally allied with the Confederacy had not yet regained the right to vote. There's definitely something fair about that. I mean, these are people who not only rejected the United States altogether, they went to war to do so. So why should they be allowed that kind of civic participation in a country they rejected? But a look back at that chapter in history is a real lesson in how dangerous it can be to cut your political enemy out of the democratic process altogether, or to think that people who can't vote have been defanged and made harmless. Whether they're fueled by righteous anger or hatred and selfishness, people who are desperate to be heard tend to lash out one way or the other. And when troublesome people lash out, it can get really, really ugly. One awful way that some Tennesseans found their voice was through vigilante action, forming groups like the Ku Klux Klan. They became a sort of shadow enforcement agency, subject to no checks, balances, or rational debate. They maintained what they saw as the rule of natural law with no semblance of due process and nothing to mediate their hate and bigotry. Many Klan members were battle-tested. They were fluent in the language of violence, and they admitted teenagers into their ranks who had just spent 4 years wishing they were old enough to fight in the war, eager to show off and be tough, fired up with adolescent rage on top of all of that baseline hate. So that was the context, as some folks in Shelbyville got pretty angry at a man named John Dunlap. He was the teacher at the school that had been established by the Freedmen's Bureau. Just like in so many southern towns, white residents started fussing about the school. They worried that students were being indoctrinated as radical Republicans, which was the most diehard wing of the party. Think about how today's most MAGA GOP talk about Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and you've got some idea of what the average white Tennessean thought of radical Republicans after the Civil War. In September 1868, the Klan decided to teach the school teacher a lesson in how they thought things should be. They kidnapped Dunlap from his home. They whipped him. They clearly wanted Dunlap to turn tail and leave town, but he didn't. Dunlap kept teaching at the Freedmen's School. When the new year came around, so did new energy for stopping Dunlap. Whispers started to spread that the school would be burned. An estimated 60 young men, ranging in age from 16 to 20, grabbed their guns, put on masks, and jumped on their horses. They headed to the school building with arson on their minds. But Shelbyville's black community heard those whispers too. And they had a desperation of their own, one born of not being protected by the official government, even as ruthless vigilantes ran wild. So they were ready. They were armed. When the riders reached their target, they were met with gunfire. The firefight lasted 5 minutes. One of the attackers was killed, 3 were wounded, the rest ran away. And the black men who defended their community's school won the day. In just a few minutes, we have What Wear Wednesday on a Thursday. This is how the holidays this week just kind of threw everything into a different schedule. And that's coming up after the newscast.
Thematic Static on WNXP is the mixtape we make together, a themed set loosely organized by you, the listener, handpicking songs according to a theme. Airing first Thursdays at 9 a.m. and again Saturdays at 9 a.m., Thematic Static plucks your requests from the socials at WNXP Nashville and by voice memo at 615-320-9100. Thematic Static, the mixtape we make together, supported by United Record Pressing, only on WNXP.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Tennessee kids as young as 14 may be faced with harsher consequences for crimes in 2025 because of a new state law. Children could be subject to so-called blended sentences if they commit or attempt to commit serious offenses like child rape or carjacking. The Times Free Press also reports that serious youthful offenders may be required to serve a sentence in a juvenile treatment facility until their 19th birthday, then face additional probation or prison time that ends on or before their 24th birthday. Or they may be transferred to adult court, where the charge would follow them for the rest of their life. Republican House Speaker Cameron Sexton told the Free Press that the law provides another tool for judges to hold violent juveniles accountable. But juvenile court judges like Hamilton County's Robert Filyaw told the outlet that the law takes away some judicial discretion and removes privacy for kids convicted of crimes who are transferred to the adult system. The number of pregnancy-related deaths is decreasing in Tennessee. But WPLN's health reporter Catherine Sweeney tells us one region missed out on the improvement.
The state released its annual maternal mortality report this month, and it found that fewer Tennesseans are dying within a year of delivering a baby. It looks at data throughout 2022. Deaths were much lower than the year before, by about 26%. That being said, the year before, 2021, was a particularly bad year for maternal mortality. The report found that the death rate actually went up in East Tennessee, more than quadrupling from a few years ago. The review committee said that's because of an increase in overdose deaths. Catherine Sweeney, WPLN News.
2025 marks 2 years since Nashville passed what was one of the nation's largest ever sports subsidies. That contentious deal for a new Tennessee Titans stadium was tied to another major project, development of the East Bank. Now WPLN Cynthia Abrams checks in on where those projects stand.
With mounds of dirt piled up, construction cranes flying overhead, and the bones of a structure in place, there's no doubt that this is a construction site. I'm standing just off to the side of the existing Nissan Stadium, and progress on the new Titans Stadium is evident. But on the East Bank, progress is less visible. Nate Carter, a member of the new East Bank Development Authority, says it's moving slowly because it requires more planning.
A lot of people said that they didn't want to turn it into another honky-tonk. You know, that's one of their biggest concerns. Like, they don't want that to turn into another Broadway downtown.
Carter joined the authority to ensure the development will actually benefit Nashvillians. He was one of many who were highly critical of the stadium deal when it first came out.
A lot of deals in the city have been done behind closed doors where people feel like, you know, their voices are not being heard.
Now that these projects are in motion, several early opponents are actually leading the efforts. That includes former council member Bob Mendez, who is now the city's chief development officer. Mendez has led the East Bank's progress thus far. That's included plans for major infrastructure work and 1,500 housing units, with a promise that nearly half will be affordable. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
It shouldn't come as a total surprise, but water rates ticked higher in Nashville with the turning of the calendar. Residential and commercial rates increased by 2.6% this year. The change will appear in February bills. Metro Water restructured its fees in 2019, and increases have been happening each year and will continue moving forward. The approach has shifted to a tiered system with rates that escalate for properties that use more water. Meanwhile, Metro is facing a new lawsuit over one of the fees it places on development projects. The Beacon Center says it's leading a class action suit over the stormwater fee that Metro created in 2023. It applies to paved surfaces that don't allow water to permeate on construction sites. Beacon argues stormwater infrastructure is a public good that should be funded evenly across residents and that it is unfairly raising the cost of home building. The legal approach is similar to a successful suit the center brought over a different fee that sought to fund more city sidewalks. In the U.S., bat populations have been on the decline for decades due to climate change, habitat loss, and a nasty fungal disease. But one species has been making a major comeback in a Tennessee cave. WPLN's Caroline Eggers reports on the recovery of the gray bat.
Gray bats are sensitive little creatures. Their populations greatly declined last century as people explored caves or used the karst landscape as a trash dump. The bat was listed as endangered in the 1970s. But the story changed after that. Corey Holliday, who manages Tennessee's caves for the Nature Conservancy, says gray bats have some unique features that make it easier to protect them.
The biggest is that they're very social and gregarious. They form these big colonies in a small number of sites.
There's only like a dozen caves that house them, so there's less overall habitat to safeguard. One location is the Bellamy Cave, less than an hour north of Nashville. In the 1980s, the Nature Conservancy recorded just 4,000 gray bats living there. The group eventually bought the cave and fenced it off to keep humans out.
And now we're consistently 350,000 plus bats. And there are so many bats in there that we can't really count them anymore.
In the realm of bat conservation, Holliday says it's a rare success story. Caroline Eggers, WPLN News.
There's a new lower speed limit for some stretches of Highway 109 in Wilson County. For about 7 miles, it will now be 45 miles per hour. News Channel 5 reports residents and business owners have been raising concerns, with some saying speeding worsened when the highway was widened to 5 lanes in 2018. Officials say they've been enforcing speed limits with frequent ticketing and that they're planning additional stoplights at some crossings to help drivers as they enter Highway 109. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. It's a new year, a new start, and amidst all the ongoing entertainment in Music City, there are opportunities for new healing through sound.
I'm Marquise Munson here with the first edition of Nashville Public Radio's What Were Wednesday of 2025, keeping you up to date with the happenings in Nashville this week. Live music this week ranges from R&B with Eric Roberson at City Winery to a collection of artists at the Blue Room for Wanneroo and Malapalooza. For more events, head over to WNXP.org/events. But this week for What Were Wednesdays, we discuss Sound Journey happening at the Schermerhorn Symphony Center.
My name is Casey Lane. I am a musician and full-time sound practitioner here in Nashville. I got into this world of sound healing through my work in songwriting. I was really working on trying to find a way to get out of my head and get creative, and started dipping into different types of meditation. Obviously was very drawn to sound healing as a musician. Ultimately went through a couple of different trainings to get certified. So as a musician, it's very interesting. You would think that a lot of the people who come to be sound healers have a music background, but probably 90% of the people don't. So one thing I'm really passionate in my trainings, and I actually just released a course last month called Music Theory for Sound Healers, where I really want to hone in on the musicality of the practice, because especially with crystal singing bowls, which is my thing, it's a very musical instrument. It's kind of westernized at its core, so a lot of elements of music theory that are applied to different other instruments can be applied to the bowls. So that's a big part of what I work on in my trainings. It's been really incredible. I honestly was worried when I first started teaching, because I'm like, oh, I'm saturating my markets. I'm like teaching all these people, because I hold a lot of workshops, and I'm teaching these people how to do what I do. But the amazing thing about this work is that there's just an endless supply of people who need it. It has been really nice to be able to kind of like spread that out through the community. The one I did in July was very cool. I was kind of assisting a guy named Davin Youngs, who is from Chicago area. His performance was very intense and beautiful, and like it felt like a soundtrack. It was really cool. He was looping live vocals. He was playing a bunch of different sound healing instruments. Really powerful. My thing will be a little more organic, if you will. I'll be mostly playing crystal singing bowls. I'll also have some backing tracks, some bass, just to bring in the low end, because the crystal bowls kind of hang in this one frequency range. And then I'll also be doing some live vocals as well. And I also will have my bestie Joanna Barbera come in of Music City Mindfulness, and she will be doing a little bit of movement. We call it mindful movement, kind of getting into some breath work for the first 20 minutes or so, where people can kind of start to downregulate their nervous systems, get ready to lay in stillness for the sound bath portion. What's very cool is that the symphony is going to have all of their seats lowered underneath the floor. So it'll be a totally flat floor area. So people will need to bring yoga mats and maybe like a pillow and a blanket. Like you're going to be laying on the floor for a solid 45 minutes. So you want to make sure you're comfortable there, because as I say, the more comfortable you are in the physical realm, the more you'll be able to leave it. So that's kind of the goal. I always think about our general relationship to sound, and our ears are constantly sensing for a threat since we're in the womb till the moment we leave this earth, right? Even while we're asleep, it's like they're on alert. They're sensing for threats, and that threat sensor is basically completely tied to our nervous system. So we know how we feel when we hear an alarm go off, or someone honks their horn, or whatever. Like that's how we get into that fight or flight nervous system response, so we can act. And so what we're really doing with sound healing is kind of leaning into that relationship on the opposite end of the spectrum by bringing in really relaxing sounds that can calm the nervous system. And, you know, we spend so much of our day a little bit on alert, even our text message notifications and our email notifications. Like we constantly have these little shots of cortisol throughout the day. So it's really nice to spend a little bit of time, I call it sonic hygiene, like at the end of the day, like give your ears a little break. You could do it by listening to a sound healing track, obviously, going to a sound bath, listening to nothing, sitting in silence for a second. Just give things a little bit of a break.
For more information about Sound Journey and other events happening this week, visit WNXP.org. My name is Marquise Munson, and thank you for listening to another edition of What Were Wednesdays, and Happy New Year.
Thanks for listening to the Nashvillager podcast. We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. And thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.